Good morning once again. Let me begin by sharing a personal fact. Last night, I celebrated my 50th birthday. And thank you. And you know, when you get to that figure 50, I think it's a moment to reflect and to give thanks to all the incredible gifts that you have received. My family, my wife and children, my friends, the chance to work in a place like this where you have the gift of meeting incredible people, giving a little bit to, or trying to give a little bit to every one of them, and receiving it back multiplied by thousands of times. And what I see here, it's a clear manifestation of that giving back. But what I wanted to reflect with you, and one of the things that I'm really, really grateful at this moment in my life, is how my life has been closely related to the evolution of this country over the last 5 decades. When I was just a child, Chile suffered an incredibly painful political, economical, and social crisis. And, you know, after this crisis, it got back on its feet and adopted a new model of free markets and trade that created enormous changes, not only for business, but for society. First, it grew in terms of economics at an unprecedented rate. Tariffs were lowered. A number of industries that had been traditionally protected by government disappeared and were replaced by new ones, more dynamic and more productive. Now Chile is not only a leader in exporting copper or mining, but we're also a world-class actor in wood, paper, fruit, wine, salmon, but not only commodities. We have developed an incredibly competitive industries in telecommunications, in retail, in financial industries, and actually several of the companies that are represented here today operate very successfully all over Latin America. Now, if you think of some social progress, poverty was reduced by almost 80%. Life expectancy, I skipped one. We reduced infant mortality by more than 90%. It's incredible. Life expectancy, in the 60s, we lagged about 10 years behind Argentina, and more than that regarding to the US. Today, Chile not only has a greater life expectancy than Argentina, we also have a greater life expectancy than the US. In terms of education, enormous progress too, and just to give you an example, tertiary enrollment, university, after high school education has sevenfolded since the early 80s. So if, let's say, free market was playing soccer in Latin America against other models, we would have won the cup, and probably the final, the score in the final game would have been like 10-0. But despite this incredible progress, Chile seems to have important portions of society not happy. Actually, the last 3 presidential elections have revolved around the issue of change, particularly the last one. The motto of the last presidential election and the elected government was reform of taxes and education, health, and so on, labor law. And the common explanations that we often hear of why this discontent has to do with ignorance, which, if true, we should fight with education, with information, because maybe people is not aware of this incredible progress. The second explanation that I often hear is ideology. You know, there are some actors pulling strings, fighting, you know, an underground war on ideology. And I don't see an easy cure if that is the real explanation. And finally, I've also heard a lot, we're just plain ungrateful. And so we got used to the comfort, and now we want more. And again, I'm not sure what would be the solution of that. However, I have 3 alternative explanations that I think are very, very important challenges for our country. I think some of them have been pointed out this morning already, but I would like to go deeper into them. The first one is the role of institutions. Historians, sociologists, economists, political scientists have all outlined the importance of institutions in social life and the long-term effect in social development. You don't have to really read this, but you have how the institutions in the 14th, 15th century in Italy actually had an impact in crime and black market until this day. So how about institutions and economic growth? Well, I picked some data. You have a GDP per capita, and you have some quality of institutions indicators according to the World Bank. Well, you have there a cloud, and it's very hard to see a clear correlation between those factors. And there you have countries that have done pretty well despite having weak institutions, because they've had plenty of commodities, they've had a good streak of political macroeconomics management, or because you've lived in a good neighborhood and you benefit from the externalities of being right next to a very prosperous country that can, you know, buy your products. However, you know, this relationship between institutions and economic development actually hits a wall. And the wall is around $20,000 per capita, which is precisely the point where Chile is now. Because after that $20,000 per capita, the relationship is very strong. So we should wonder, what is the quality of institutions in Chile? What is the reputation of institutions in Chile? What can we do to improve the functioning and the reputation of these institutions? And if we look at recent examples of institutions that have cared about competition, institutions that have rewarded, for instance, on the use of privileged information, or institutions regulating the relationship between business and politics, well, I think they were not as good as we thought they were. which is in fact a great opportunity. A second fact that I wanted to talk about, and I think it's a very, very important challenge for our country, is the structure and the quality of the social fabric. When you look at indicators of human development, like education, health, life expectancy, you find a very strong correlation, again, between economic development and human development. Richer countries tend to have better indicators than poor countries. And poor countries improve in these indicators, just as Chile did, as we grow in terms of economics. But if you zoom in into those countries that already have, a medium level of income, well, the correlation is much weaker. And when you want to find what explains the differences within these countries, you actually find that things like inequality have a great importance. And Chile has a great deal of inequality. What kind of society do we want to live in? Even within a country like Italy, there are regions with more inequality than others, and they have a lower life expectancy. And when you correlate this inequality with other social problems, like learning in math, or murder rate, or obesity, you find again a very strong correlation. Even how many people do we put in jail? So inequality speaks of a weak social fabric. But let me go deeper into this fact. If you think of real estate development in Santiago or in Chile, and zoning, the zoning regulation, the city, this beautiful city that we are now, is actually a multi-ghetto city, where you can buy a house for a few $1,000s or a few $1 million, and you will live with your equals, very well protected from your non-equals. And your children will grow there, growing on their prejudice on the children on the other bubbles. Chileans are not what we would call joiners, except for church and religious organization and sports. We have one of the lowest levels in the world in participation in other civil organizations. So I think a lot of people, and with good reasons, would feel excluded from this incredible progress that we've had. Let me touch a third aspect that I think it has been touched before, but the role of trust. If you look at OECD data on trust, again, there is a very strong relationship between trust and economic development. I intentionally didn't put Chile there. But how is Chile and how is trust evolving in Chile? Let me show you some data from other countries as well. The World Value Survey has done several waves of data collection. So I put in blue the early waves and in red the late waves, the last wave 2010, 2014. So there you have, countries like the Netherlands, good for you, Jan, Sweden or New Zealand, in which almost 2/3 of the people think that people can be trusted, and which have shown a tremendous improvement in trust. You have the case of Singapore, which in the early 90s showed levels of trust that were comparable to Latin America, but have doubled over these years. So I'm very, very interested, Professor Tan, what you're going to say about the story of Singapore. Well, the USA declined and hit very badly on the financial crisis, and Latin America falling or stagnated. Actually, Chile falling in half. So where are the sources of mistrust and trust? Well, look at this. This is a net trust indicator that I built. So it's trust minus mistrust. Well, we certainly do not trust political parties. We do not trust the courts, the government, labor unions. Who do we trust? Well, we trust the armed forces, we trust the press, sorry it's not there, and we trust NGOs. And we trust churches, which is also there. It's the 33%. So when I think of the government and the businesses getting together on an agenda to rebuild trust, I think of two rock rivers embracing each other, thinking that together they will float better. Businesses and government need to go and work with these other sources of trust. Private businesses have a tremendous impact in our life. According to the last report by the World Bank, 90% of the jobs are created by private corporations, by the private sector. Even in China, more than 50% of the jobs are from the private sector. In Chile, only 20 corporations, the revenues of 20 corporations account for more than 50% of the GDP. 4 corporations are actually a quarter of that GDP. So I wonder, are these corporations going to work in this alliance and be part of the solution or be part of the problem? I believe that the presentation we just heard by Mr. Insulza and His Eminence Cardinal Turkson point to the latter, businesses as actors of social good. Businesses can be the largest power of social change. Mr. Luricina has written very interesting pieces on inequality and the role of private corporations. The works of Professor Sate suggest that firms could attain economic and social value at the same time as they work towards a better future for all. Professor Hart is the father of the concept of the base of the pyramid, which explains how and why private firms could and should serve the needs of the poorest of the poorest. I look forward to his presentation. What can corporations do to improve trust? Well, the data reveals that banks and major companies are nearly as mistrusted as government. In that sense, I'm very interested on the presentation of Professor Eccles. He's one of the most important defenders of corporate transparency and accountability. I'm sure, too, that Professor Laszlo will inspire and motivate you with his concept of flourishing. Laszlo may help us understand how private enterprises can act to fortify the social fabric. So what can corporations do to strengthen the reputation and quality of institutions? I'm extremely interested in hearing the presentations of Judy Samuelson about her work on business and society at the Aspen Institute, and Professor Tan, who will tell us the story of Singapore. Chile is a country in search of answers, and we're here to learn. Finally, let me finish with a personal story that touches us, that touches on many of the questions for which we seek answers today. I grew up in a city called Rancagua, a small city about 50 miles south of Santiago. My family moved there because my father worked as a geologist for the Braden Copper Company in El Teniente mine, which was later expropriated by the government and is now part of Codelco, the largest state-owned copper mining company in the world. Well, that American company, Braden, arrived in 1905, and soon they realized that the mine was phenomenal and copper reserves would last for over 150 years. They recognized then that they had to think in the long term. Accordingly, they decided not to import all the talent and professional knowledge they needed, as other mining companies were doing in the rest of Chile. They decided to foster the local talent instead. So the company hired local workers and trained them as best as they could. When I was a kid, many of those early workers of very, very poor origins had reached senior management positions. In addition, Braden decided to provide scholarships for all the children of their workers, even up to their college education. These scholarships and the diffusion of a true culture of meritocracy, which at that moment in history was an innovation in a world of agriculture and paternalism, had a tremendous impact in the community. My school class was very diverse. My classmates ranged from the sons of the lowest level miners to the children of the CEO. Even those kids whose parents did not work for the mine shared the benefits. With the available resources, our school and other schools could also provide scholarship for the less fortunate kids in the city. One of the things that strikes me today is that all of us, and I mean really all of us in the class, had the expectation, the conviction, the certainty that if we work hard enough, we would go to college and prosper in life. Just as importantly, or maybe more, our teachers and our parents share the same expectations and convictions. In fact, the only thing that offered a kid status in our school were their athletic abilities, their grades, thanks God, because I was terrible at soccer, and your fist fighting skills. Nobody really cared who your father was. And I never realized how truly equal opportunity to excel would make such a difference in the lives of so many. For almost 100 years, the Braden Copper Company, and later El Teniente that followed, changed the lives of thousands and thousands of children. It was very common for miners to have all their children graduated as doctors, lawyers, or architects. I am certain that single corporation changed the entire city. In my case, I became an engineer and later a professor. The son of the lady who sold candy in a beat-up cart outside the school is now a very successful businessman. And the brother of one of my classmates is now the chairman of the board of one of the sponsoring companies here. Corporations can and should create economic value, but they can also be tremendous tools for social improvement. This morning we had Mass with the Cardinal, and he spoke of God living and being love in action. So here's an invitation to all of you. We live in a wonderful country, But the future of this country and the future of those that will come after us is in your hands, and corporations can really make a difference. Thank you very much.